Welcome back to Out Loud, the podcast where fitness meets community and inclusivity. Today's episode is part one of a two-part series from the Out Foundation on trans allyship in fitness, with dialogue moderated by Hall of Fame triathlete, transgender advocate, and policymaker Chris Mosier. Chris's conversation features OUTAmbassadors Amazin LeThi, Joe Murdock, and Mack Beggs. Amazin LeThi is an athlete, speaker, and advocate for the LGBTQ+ community around the world. Joe Murdock is a former Lululemon ambassador and fitness instructor, having taught for brands like Nike, Self Magazine, and Netflix. Mack Beggs is a championship wrestler who was featured on Hulu's Changing the Game, ESPN Films, and Disney+. He advocates for policy change around the transgender community's access to sport. Let's join Chris, Amazin, Joe, and Mack as they discuss trans allyship in fitness.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Mosier. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm a Team USA athlete in duathlon and triathlon, a four-time national champion and All-American, and I'm the founder of transathlete.com. And I am so thrilled to join you today to host this panel discussion with the Out Foundation called Trans Allyship in Fitness. Today, I'm joined by some incredible panelists who I will let introduce themselves. So I want to do name, pronoun, your sport, and then what you love about fitness or your sports. And we'll start with Amazin.
Hi there, my name is Amazin LeThi. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a former competitive natural bodybuilder, and now I'm training to compete in competitive shooting. For me, what I love about fitness and sport, it was the place where I built my confidence and self-worth and where I saw myself for the first time as a queer Asian athlete, because through the power of bodybuilding and sport itself, I was able to love and celebrate myself, which I couldn't do beforehand.
Fantastic. So good to have you here. Joe, how about you?
Hey, my name is Joe Murdock. Pronouns are she, her. My sport is actually dance, and that can be argued, but I'm ready to argue it. Currently operating in the space of yoga. And what I love about it is the transition from being able to use my body in a competitive way. I was a competitive dancer, jazz and tap, but then moving into a space where my sport became more healing when I found yoga, or when yoga found me. So that's kind of the space I'm operating in now. However, I've been able to enjoy and love how I take yoga and bring references of dance to it. So it's choreography, but it's more of a movement therapy, and less about hitting it on the right count of 8 and making sure that your toes are pointed and your arms are where they need to be. It's more about what feels good, what you need in that moment.
I love that, Joe, and I will throw down for you. Dance is absolutely a sport. All right, Mac, how about you?
My name is Mack Beggs, and I have been known as a wrestler for 7 to 10 years, basically now a decade. I did competitive college wrestling at Life University for 3 years, and was known and was on the women's and men's national team when I was in high school. And then now I dabble in trying to make it consistent as a full-time MMA and BJJ athlete. I love the sport. What I truly actually love about it, also he him pronouns, and what I truly love about it is when I was a kid, I just had, if I'm being honest, I had so much anger, and I needed like a healthy outlet in order to kind of put my mental health into that state of mind. And it if I'm being honest, wrestling and just martial arts in general has given me such a power of just self worth, not just in for my body, but for my mind as well. It's like has given me this temple to not only, and I'll even testify to you this, like dancing, I did that competitively for 10 years, and it is absolutely a workout. I actually call martial arts a dance in itself, and actually they're trying to make it to where kind of there's like a Brazilian type of dance into MMA, so that's why I love it. It's actually expanded my athletic performance on so many levels and has been able to teach me things that these life skills that other things that I would get from has never taught me before.
Mac, that is such a good segue to our first question here, which is, you just mentioned that you had a lot of anger and that you were able to sort of channel that through sport. And I definitely resonates with me because as a young person, pre-transition, pre having the language to say that I'm a trans person, I was a second degree black belt in karate, and that was a way for me to really channel some of the things that I felt inside but didn't have the words for. So I'm curious if you could expand a little bit more on that, the feelings of anger and the way that you process, sort of how does fitness impact your mental and emotional well-being as a trans person?
I think when I'll even dabble into kind of my high school experience. I don't know. I'll go into my college experience. There was times that I felt like I didn't belong there, and the men especially, like going on like a full men's team and transitioning that from especially in Texas when I was on the women's team and having to kind of go through this gender and sexuality type of conversation was like gave me a lot of anxiety, and also it made me feel angry that I couldn't be able to be my true self. But even if I was my true self, the people didn't accept me that way. So a lot of the times I had to just block everybody out. I had to create this shield and really focus on what my coach had to say or the peers that wanted to teach me better and getting better in martial arts, or whether it was running or just fitness in general. It was a way for all of us to kind of get on the same page. And in that process, I realized that fitness and sports is a way for people to come together. Like it's not even just about like what I even do outside of that. What matters what we feel in that moment, and those connections kind of made that anger and that anxiety and all those feelings that I felt that were just so deep down inside. And it's just like, especially as being open and as a trans male athlete, and that was just hard to process sometimes. And so you really got to dig down deep, and especially when you do athletics as a trans individual, especially during this day and age, I feel like you just need so much courage in order to fight those feelings of what your mental health is wherever you are in that process, and just really focus on the sport and just getting mentally and physically better as yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Mac. And I think Joe, you might have a different perspective on this, or I'm very curious about your thoughts because you mentioned healing in your introduction. So, how does fitness impact your mental and emotional well-being as a trans?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of discuss it via timeline. So, I've been dancing since three, pink leotards, tutus, not really understanding much. Everything was butterflies and connecting it to just animals. It was fun. It was play. It was dress up. As I moved into competition dancing, it was very much more of like, does your body type match majority of the dancers so that our formations look good? Are you as flexible as the majority of the folks here so that when we ask you for this leg at this height, everyone's leg is at this height? And even further, are you a spinner? Are you a jumper? Can we lift you? Are you like skinny enough, light enough for us to lift you? Or are you someone on the base? So just like a lot of things like, oh, I don't fit into this category because of that, or I'm not mobile and flexible in this way, so I can't do that, or I can do this. I don't really like it. I was a flyer. I didn't really like to be thrown in the air, but I was tiny, and that's kind of like the category I fell into. So there's a lot of comparing in your group, and there's a lot of comparing for self. So at that time, dancing for fitness, was not really good for my mental health. But I think during those years, we didn't have the words for a lot of things. We have words for now, and understanding of now. It was like, maybe you just need more rest. Maybe you need to drink more water. You just need to work harder. That's kind of the band-aid that was put on it. And so now, in the space of yoga and overall just wellness, to be well and understanding well-being, um, I feel like the fitness has turned more into, like a mental fitness. Am I doing, is what I'm doing serving me? Do I feel calm in the mind? Can I hear my heart beating? Is it beating out of my chest, or is it beating at a pace that like I'm like aware of it and it's intentional and it feels okay? The fitness is now being able to like close my eyes during movement and feel safe. And it has been a complete flip from how I thought of myself and thought of movement growing up in competition dance to now. There was a lot of, I have to move and do things this way for my teacher, my choreographer. And now, the classes that I choose to take, I am listening to the teacher. Sure, someone's guiding me, but I can choose if I want to do that shape. I can choose if I need to go to child's pose. I can choose to make something easier. I can choose to make it harder. And I'm not ruining the formation or ruining the choreography, in the yoga class. So it has been amazing for my mental health. And I'm just very glad that I was still able to find that change and that support in movement and being able to move my body. For me, if I'm not moving my body, I'm already operating, at a deficient level. I have to be doing some type of movement. And I was working in tech for 5 years and I felt it there. There was no movement, no dance class, yoga class, nothing. So moving, period, absolutely helps mental health. You can, if you don't have the words for something, your movement can be how you tell that story or how you purge and express it. A lot of folks don't have the right words, and also a lot of folks are not listened to. So even if you do have the words, you're kind of talking to yourself, and that doesn't feel good. I feel like with movement and fitness, however you approach it, think of it, you can say your piece, tell your story, express yourself, release it through the breath, through the movement. Somatic movement is wild. It is insane. It is beautiful. It is so necessary. And I'm glad that it's getting a lot of attention now. So it's all connected, truly. It is all connected. And movement is a way of like releasing the things that are heavy, that don't serve you, no matter what it is: yoga, dance, any type of fitness. Yeah.
Yeah, so much of what you just said about the dance piece and that sort of scrutiny on the body really sort of also made me think of Amazin's experience as a competition bodybuilder and the scrutiny on bodies there. And I think in the queer community and the trans community, there's so much scrutiny on our bodies. And when we're athletes, that is just elevated to the next level. So I want to shift over to um, Amazin, your experience as a competitive bodybuilder. How did you navigate either gender dysphoria, if that was part of your experience, or at the very least body image in relation to fitness and exercise? Because I know that was such a huge part of your sport.
Bodybuilding is a really interesting sport because it has very rigid gender norms of what is defined as a man and what is defined as a woman. But at the same time, women who enter into bodybuilding, who obviously bodybuilding, you become muscular in the gym, it really pushes those gender norms, and bodybuilding has always had a problem with the dynamics and shifting of that gender norm of women who are muscular but still retain their femininity as well. I had I think, I didn't have gender dysphoria. I'm a cis woman, but I had very low self-worth of myself with the struggles of sexuality and the discrimination and racism that I had received in society and sport. and entering into bodybuilding, it gave me the confidence and self-worth, but at the same time, I also struggled with these very rigid gender norms and that I had to come up against and fight against because bodybuilding is also a very sexist and very misogynistic sport as well, completely dominated by white men in the gym who have this rigid idea of masculinity, which is quite toxic masculinity as well. Um, and there is a stereotype in sport that women who are in more athletic sports are already classified as gay or queer. So struggling with my sexuality, having to hide that, struggling with the concept of being masculine and feminine, fighting against the bodybuilding community of the rigid gender norms and their thought that if I'm going to be in this sport that I'm going to be gay anyway, but also for the fact that it's such a heterosexual normative sport that you couldn't come out. It's just like fighting all these intersectional issues at once, which gave me a really clear vision of the difficulty in sport that we see today because I stepped into bodybuilding when I was 6. I started in the gym when I was 7 or 8. I started competing as a teenager. So I've had sports in my life as long as I can remember. Um, so, even now, there's still that struggle and that dynamic within bodybuilding when I step into the gym. But it still really hasn't been accepted. It still really hasn't accepted the LGBTQ community because of the out branches of LGBTQ bodybuilding federations that have had to pop up because of you know the issues within the general bodybuilding federation. It's really interesting now for me, now that I don't compete anymore. I still go to the gym now. I've transitioned into a completely different sport of shooting that has nothing to do with my physical appearance at all. It's quite a strange concept and shift for me. Um, but yes, it was. I entered into a very difficult sport at a very young age, and I've been battling these stereotypes for decades within my sport.
Yeah, and I love that, even though you were battling those stereotypes, you still mentioned that that sport was the space where you built confidence and self-worth. And, I just want to call out that your experience as a cis queer woman in this sport that is highly scrutinizing people's bodies. I mean, that is the intention of the sport, is to judge people's bodies, right? It is very, very closely mirrors the experience of our trans athletes right now, where the scrutiny on trans athletes and on our bodies is so intense and can drive people out of sport. Given your experience in the fitness industry, what can cisgender people and people who are not queer in the fitness industry do to better support and be allies to trans and queer athletes?
Sure. It's so important as a cis person and cis athletes to raise their voice. It's about being an ally in action. Whenever I've asked this question about, how can you be an ally to queer people? It's the same for trans people. It's like you're trans 365 days a year. It's not during Pride month. So it has to be part of my DNA that I stand up as an ally because so much is said when you're not in the room. And it's in that moment that I need to raise my voice as an ally when I hear transphobia or inappropriate language towards trans people, but also make it an educational moment for that person because the people they surround themselves with, they may never have been called out. So they may not think that transphobia is a problem or inappropriate language is an issue at all. And also, there's just so much information that cis people have around, trans inclusion in sports and trans people in general, because, we know that so few people have ever met a trans person. So it's important that, I share my story as to my journey of being an ally for the trans community, for other cis people to see why it's so important, and particularly in sport, because the policing around trans women is policing around women, and we all suffer when you police one part of the community.
Yeah, I can jump on in. I absolutely think there's a responsibility on behalf of cisgender folks to uplift and support everyone who's not cisgender. Let's just say that. Let's make it very clear. There's a privilege that they have, and we know this. There's privilege in, and I'll bring it back to yoga, skinnier bodies in the wellness space. There's a privilege on Instagram and social media with flexible bodies and mobile bodies. And I do feel like when you operate in a space and can identify your privileges very clearly, you use those privileges to uplift, to bring into the conversation folks who do not have those privileges. And I think that's part of the work in being an ally, knowing what your privileges are and using them in the right way to uplift folks who are otherwise not thought of and underrepresented because they do not have them. So 110%. You cannot change the skin that you are in. Flexibility, mobility, or skinny, or however you show up in spaces, these are things you usually cannot change without like being very clear and specific on a work ethic around it. So use it in the right ways to uplift and be heard. People will hear you, people will see you. So make sure that they are seeing the right things on behalf of you. Make sure they are hearing the right things on behalf of you. And I feel very blessed that I do have a lot of friends who take their privileges and use them in a right way to have, give me opportunities as a person who's BIPOC and queer that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten, and people wouldn't have known that I have talents, these certain talents and these certain skills, if my cisgender white friends did not say, hey, do you know Joe? And I'm very grateful for that. And it is what it is, right? Should we all just be seen? Absolutely. But that is not what the world we're operating in. So there is a heavy, heavy responsibility for sure.
Wow, those are all really like good things, especially someone who is a trans man. When I was a kid, I think my greatest fear was that I was always worried that my cisgender friends or people that I grew up with would really just absolutely hate me, not even just strongly dislike, just absolutely pure hatred. And I do want to make another note. There are over 600 bills now that are anti-trans policies in the US right now. So my biggest commitment that I made the past couple of years is to be very graceful and just give people the opportunity to be able to have a voice even if they are cis, and create a safe space for them to ask questions. And I always try to be like, oh well, you could always come to me when you need, if there's a question that you have about the queer community, or let alone being intersex or trans, like we could figure out this conversation together. One thing that I very commend the coaches that I've worked with along the years, as well as the athletes, is that they're very responsive once you're allowing yourself to kind of open up and open your story in a way that you know you handle. I over the years have had to handle my story with grace, because not the athletic world, especially wrestling being a very male dominated sport, and thank God girls wrestling has grown in the past year because it needs to. um I just am personally very grateful that the people that I've chosen along this path and journey, especially being a trans man and being in athletics and trying to continue fitness in general, is to listen to people like you, because if we're not listening to each other at the end of the day, then where are we going to go?
That is a wonderful way to wrap us up. Thank you, Mack. As you just mentioned, there are over 600 anti-trans bills in our country right now, and in 25 states in our country, that's half of our country, trans youth can't play sports safely with their friends in school. But the truth is, trans and non-binary people deserve safe spaces to experience all of the joys in sport, just like everyone else. So thank you, Amazin, Joe, and Mack for sharing your thoughts and experiences, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in and continuing to be good allies for our trans, non-binary, and intersex athletes.
That was Hall of Fame transgender athlete Chris Mosier in conversation with OUTAmbassadors Amazin LeThi, Joe Murdock, and Mack Beggs. Chris is the first trans athlete to make Team USA, and in 2015 became the first known transgender man to represent the United States in international competition. You can learn more about Chris, his trailblazing history as a trans athlete, and his advocacy for transgender people in sport on his website, transathlete.com. You can also learn more about Amazin, Joe, Mack, and all of our OUTAmbassadors on our website at theoutfoundation.org. Join us next time for part 2 of our conversation as we feature 2 athletes representing the Out Foundation in this year's Out Athlete class. As always, thanks for listening as we continue to sweat, laugh, and live out loud.